Introduction: my father's 50-year silence. My father, Jack Wilson, rarely spoke about the war. Like so many veterans of his generation, he carried those memories quietly locked away. He did speak to some of his grandchildren about the war, but none of the details were ever discussed. Looking back at my father over the years, he operated at a different level than others who never served in World War II. In all he did, he was very decisive, sometimes doing things others found to be unacceptable, but in line with all the things he believed in and lived with for decades. The horrors he witnessed, the friends he lost, and the impossible decisions he made remain largely protected, perhaps to shield us from the truths too heavy to bear. It wasn't until 1994, on the 50th anniversary of D-Day, that I wrote him a letter. I told him that I had been thinking about what his generation went through, and that while I could never fully understand, I wanted him to know he would always be a hero to me. His response surprised me. The letter, he said, had opened a door he had kept closed for half a century. What followed was an extraordinary gift, not just to our family, but to history itself. With the encouragement of his lifelong friend, Frank Taylor, Dad finally decided to share his story. In 1995, drawing from vivid recollections, he created a brief chronicle of some of the major actions he had experienced during those pivotal months from 1944 to 1945. When just 23 years old, he commanded tanks through some of World War II's most brutal battles. His 1995 notes were just the skeleton of the story, factual but spare. Then, in recent years, the missing pieces emerged. Over 100 letters that Dad had written home during the war were discovered in my sister's basement and given to me. With these letters in hand, and with invaluable help from the 7th Armored Division historian, Wesley Johnston, who provided access to after-action reports and unit archives, I was able to track Dad's daily experiences and weave his 1995 notes into their actual historical path. The letters revealed the young man behind the officer, his fears and hopes, his love for my mom, Jean, his struggles with the moral weight of command. This is what transformed it from a military chronicle into a story told in his own words. In July 1995, Dad wrote a cover letter to his closest friends, acknowledging what he was about to reveal. Some moments were almost too difficult to put into words. Moments that involve moral choices no young man should have to make, losses that cut too deep, and experiences that would mark him forever. I've watched the current generation of youngsters growing up with little or no expression of patriotism, he wrote near the end of his letter. I am developing a deep concern about to whom we are entrusting the future of our great nation. He died on Christmas Day in 1997, 4 years before September 11th, 2001. But I believe that if he had lived to see that day and the surge of patriotism and voluntary military service that followed, he would have stood at attention with tears of pride in his eyes. He would have recognized in that modern generation the same spirit. They were Americans who, when called upon, answered with extraordinary courage. Jack Wilson graduated from the University of Washington in June of 1943 with a degree in scientific business management. He had been active in ROTC during his college years, earning recognition for leadership and command. After graduation, he entered the Armored Officers Training School at Fort Knox, Kentucky. It was during his training at Fort Knox that he proposed to his college sweetheart, Jean, sending her a charming caricature showing him in his tank at Fort Knox, reaching across the miles to Spokane with an engagement ring. They were married in January of 1944 at St. John's Episcopal Cathedral in Spokane, and Jean joined him back at Fort Knox. He was 22 years old, newly married, and filled with the optimism and plans typical of a young man his age. By the time he landed in Normandy in autumn of 1944 and joined the 7th Armored Division, 17th Tank Battalion, the war in Europe had been raging for more than 5 years. The Allied forces had successfully landed on D-Day and were pushing east through France and Belgium towards Germany. Jack was assigned as a platoon leader in Company A, commanding 5 tanks and 25 men. Most of the men were seasoned combat veterans, which was important for the fresh lieutenants who had never seen battle. Dad referred to as Second Lieutenant Wilson. First Lieutenant Wilson, and eventually Captain Wilson, was a young man from Seattle who loved to play the piano, managed the crew team at the University of Washington, threw elaborate parties with his fraternity brothers, and got married when he graduated to the love of his life. He was in many ways just like the young men serving today, thrust into circumstances far beyond anything in civilian life had prepared him for, doing his best to lead well, to protect his men, and to make it home alive. The weight of command sat heavily on his shoulders. In a letter to his father, he wrote, "When I think of men's lives that depend on my judgment and actions, I sometimes feel that the job is just too big for me." Time and again, through the battles that raged from Belgium through Germany to the Baltic Sea, he proved himself capable of being the leader his men needed. He received his first battlefield promotion to first lieutenant and was later recommended for captain. More importantly, his men followed him and trusted him. Throughout his service, Dad wrote constantly to his wife, Jean, and to his parents. The letters revealed a young man deeply in love, profoundly homesick, and struggling to reconcile what he was experiencing with the life he hoped to return to. He wrote about missing Jean, about the baby on the way, and about the dreams after the war, including the house he wanted to build on Mercer Island, Washington, with a lawn running down to the water's edge. But the letters also showed a soldier grappling with the reality of war. After his first taste of combat, he wrote to his father, "I don't know how to start, but the idea is like this. Our job here is more rugged than I ever could have imagined. I can't see any reason in the world why men have to kill each other just to prove a point or two." Censorship rules prevented him from sharing specific details about locations or operations. What he could share, and did, was the humanity of the experience, camaraderie among the men, small comforts they found amid the cold and mud, constant presence of danger, and deep desires to simply survive and come home. My father would want you to know that he didn't consider himself a hero. He considered himself lucky to have served with fine men, lucky to have survived, and to make it home to the family he loved. To those of us who knew him, and those who will come to know his experiences through these letters, Jack Wilson will always be what I said he was in that letter 35 years ago. You are my hero.